Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome. Come on in. And as you all are joining us, if you all would just give me 1 second. I want to make sure we've got our speaker. Welcome back. I'm excited about this session. You will definitely be able to join in with us as you have questions. And so I see Gina here. So let me pin your video, I think. And we're going to dive right into this conversation. Our apologies. We went a little over in our last session. Can you hear me, Gina?
Yes, ma'am. I sure can.
Okay. Awesome. I can hear you. I can't see you, but I'm going to.
Okay, let's see.
There we go. I can see you now.
And I think I'm gonna change my background because I'm trying to be fancy. We've got a fire, but these virtual backgrounds are not green.
You know what?
I said I gotta have some fire for this chat, but this fire might not work. So let me just flip this out real quick. And we will continue.
Sometimes it acts right, and sometimes it
doesn't. But you know what? That's a whole other conversation for it. For a different day. I'm figuring something out with that. But
you are all good. So as you are doing that, everyone, I want to make sure that you all know that you all will have access to all of the recordings and the playbacks, and this will be one that we make sure is on the podcast. I'm excited about this fireside chat. So Gina Waters Miller, what can I say? I feel like there's so much I could say, but I don't want to take up all of the time. And we have about 20 minutes of this conversation because we went over. Let me ask you this question. So we've spent some time today talking about personal branding and how we show up and how we introduce ourselves and how we leverage our experiences and own our story. We know that you have been a trailblazer in the music industry. How do you introduce yourself? How do you share about the wealth of the experience and expertise that you have when you're sharing about who you are?
I mean, if I could give you one, first of all, let me say hello. Like I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to this all week. If I could say one thing about myself, I always lean into servant. If that's the one word, people say, what's that one thing that summarizes who you are and what you're here to do? I would definitely say servant. Servitude is the whole solution. That's the secret sauce.
Secret sauce. Service is the secret sauce. That is so good. So when I think about that, and I think about so many of the headlines and articles, and I think things that people probably see and think about when they hear and think about you as the vice president at Entertainment One. I know one of the things that I noticed was about your start. So your start as an intern, your start from a non-traditional perspective. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, non-traditional means a lot of different things to a lot of people, right? In my case, I've heard people want to clarify that and say, oh, were you an older student? Were you blah, 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 blah? And I'm like, no, I was out of college. I was already married and I had 2 sons. So it didn't get more non-traditional than that. And I really at the time thought that I needed to do something different. Well, it was one of those scenarios where, you meet somebody that knows somebody, which is half of the way the world goes around. But I found out that a man who I had been seeing every week at football practice actually was the CEO and president at the time of a record label that eventually became my home. And so the process to getting there was me recognizing that there was something really different about him. I was looking at all the other parents and I was like, there's something really unique about this guy. I need to get to know. I really felt a pull that I needed to get to know him, which was way away from my norm, different from my comfort zone. But I put myself out there and I said, I just feel like I'm supposed to know you. And it really, and I'm gonna tell you what was the other indication to that was, all the other parents were, we were driving modest cars, Cadillac Escalades, Camrys, whatever. And he was like in a Porsche, like a big old man, big stature in a Porsche. And I thought, yeah, there's something I'm supposed to know about who he is. And so I asked him, we got to talking, and he said, he runs this record label. And I was like, that sounds like the link I need, He was like, well, I don't hire, but I'm happy to introduce you to the
Mm.
president and the general manager who does all the hiring. And that's how it started. That man introduced me to a man who I walked in the door and said, do you have a job? He said, no. I said, but can I come hang out? He said, sure. And I did it for free for a whole year before they finally said, well,
Wow.
let's create a part-time job for you. And
Wow.
the rest is history. I've
Well,
done
the rest is history because
the rest really is history.
you now sit in that role. You now sit
I mean,
in
and the
the
crazy
role.
thing is, Brittany, someone was asking me a few weeks ago. I remember when that president and general manager said to me, you're sharp, you're a lot of things. But he basically said, one day you're going to have my job. Absolutely. He was like, you'll have my job one day. And so we just kind of, chuckled about it and went on with the day. But here we are. And I'm grateful for it too. I'm grateful. So
Here we are. So talk about, our entire theme for today is about making Black history. And one of the things I love about that story is that you leaned into vulnerability. So I'm gonna ask you this question because I've spent the last 3 years leaning into it myself and writing about it and now sharing it and getting to a place where I'm comfortable leading conversations with a lot of people around it. But it's this idea of the strong Black woman. And I know I'm going off script here, but
it's fine. Go for it. Go.
Fireside chat. Okay. So like you shared in that moment, you were like, hey, I feel like I need to know you. And like that was the lead in. Like, how do you help and coach and mentor and talk to us about that too? Women who feel like, I gotta have it all together, gotta have the I dotted, the T cross in the elevator pitch versus like leaning into those vulnerable moments to say, hey, I don't know what I don't know, but that vulnerability could position me for an opportunity where the rest is history. What are your
I
thoughts on
am
that?
so pro that, really on both sides of the spectrum, right? So as far as what you don't know, you can't, it's so much better to just embrace what you don't know. But a lot of times we get so caught up on our weaknesses that we tend to overlook what our strengths are. I still don't know it all, but I've got great people around me and I keep encouraging them to know more than I know and to do more than I've done and to go further than I could even imagine. And so I think we have to be okay with that first. And you got to kind of remove your ego enough to say, look, I'm leading a team right now that I really hope that they know more than I know right now today. I really hope that. And if not, I'm doing something wrong. I'm not encouraging them in the right way. I hope I'm opening doors for them. I'm hoping I'm giving them opportunities that are coming to me. I'll say, hey, call some of these guys. They're incredible. They're talented. They're intelligent. And so I think we have to be willing to do that. And that takes vulnerability too. That takes a vulnerable place to say, you know what? Let me do some other things for some other people. That still kind of goes back to service, right? And servitude. But I think that when it comes to a corporate structure, I told a story the other day to a bunch of college students, and it still applies. Like when it comes down to being able to be prepared, being able to be open, being able to be flexible, being able to be willing. So willingness also means saying, I don't really know, but guess what? If you can equip me, you can empower me. If you can take the time with me, you can teach me. It's like not knowing is not the end of the road. But I also think back to, it's like pieces of a Lego. I tell the story all the time about my two sons who are now 21 and almost 21 and 25. But they were very different as little boys with their Lego sets. One of them was very classical. My son is like a classically trained, he's a classical student to the core, to textbook. He will study, regurgitate, spit it out. My other son, honestly, I feel all the time I failed him. I should have found some kind of alternative learning environment for him. But both of them would grab their Lego box, and my older son would just create exactly what was on the box to a T. My youngest son never looked at the box. So it'd be my oldest son who'd be frustrated at him because he built something that wasn't on the box. Who told him he could build what was not on the picture? And, he would go grab pieces from other boxes and kits that didn't even match and just make his own thing. We have to kind of look at the pieces like that. The pieces won't always lend themselves to what's on the box or even what we put the picture, our own picture that we created on the box, right? But I do say that you're going to lose some pieces along the way, much like my boy. We would buy those boxes and they wouldn't even find all the pieces to make what was on the box. But then you go back and revisit some other pieces from other boxes and pull those in and create something. You still have enough pieces. Let me tell you something. I believe that nothing is lost, nothing is lacked. You have everything you need right now to keep going, to build the thing that you can envision if you just reimagine the picture.
Yes, yes,
You
yes,
have to
and yes.
reimagine the picture.
You got to
Reimagine the picture. And I
Now,
think, that's half the battle right there. It's just reimagining a new picture. And this applies to all this stuff, right? It's like applying to, it's really reimagining the workforce differently. It's reimagining who is even able to fit into a workforce based on, a lot of times now there's been so much conversation about, education or all these things. I'm like, we should all be looking at what's possible. In 2021 and beyond, what's possible to me is so much larger than some of these other things that we have used as requirements and benchmarks to do most everything.
Yeah. I see Sylvia in the chat. She said, reimagine the picture. I needed to hear that. Yes, that is so good. And speaking of that, speaking of reimagining and sometimes this fixed mindset, I think we see it a lot in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know you work in that space too. So it's, this idea that if we have a focus and a priority on Black professionals, if we look to advance Black people in our organization, it is at the disservice of white professionals. What do you say to a leader who, and let's just go back here, we were here this morning with DaCosta, but they believe it's the right thing to do, but they don't believe that it's a business imperative. So they're struggling with, how do I show up as a leader and get on board with diversity, equity, and inclusion fully, when in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about, well, if I invest in that Black professional, will they take my job?
They're gonna take my space.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, we don't have enough time to unpack this. But the real problem is, that's the problem, is that we think inherently that someone is taking your spot. All you're really doing is creating access. You're creating access. So we think often like, we're dealing with this now in a lot of different rooms that I've been invited to. It's not about taking someone else's seat. It's literally putting another slab of wood in there and extending the table and adding more chairs. Like, there's a benefit to even the alignment of white people and Black people together. Like, I have been screaming that to the mountaintop over the last week. Like, we need white allyship in the truest form, when it's really allyship, not just people who are like, oh, I'm doing this, and really they don't fully understand how it is to be a good leader first and foremost. Because I'm really down to a different place with this, Brittany. It's like, there's been so much talk about diversity and inclusion that more of these conversations I'm listening to, really, that's part B and C. That part one is making better leaders, is equipping, it's creating, it's humanity. Like, it really, we can't even deal with how you treat me because of anything that you see on your screen right now before we just deal with the fact of how you feel about people who are different from you. I've dealt with it this week in a lot of conversations, even down to my dialect. Like, I'm literally on the call, like, at some point that became exhausted. Like, who's exhausted by that? This girl. Like, I'm like, this is what you get. Like, this is who I am, because dialect has nothing to do with what I don't know as much as it is about where I'm from. Like, you can't do anything about that part, but get to know the person behind the sound and figure out what else is there. Because when it all boils down to this, more times than not, we all have more in common than we do different. So you have leaders who, one, chances are, and I hate to put this shoe on someone, but if you're uncomfortable with the conversation, you're likely an offender. You're the likeliest of offender that's walking around. So you really need to take a real hard check at why this is bothering you, why you are uncomfortable with the idea that someone can even take something from you, because that is so not possible. It's just not possible. It's not possible. We all bring something special to the table. Now, if someone else adding to that table brings more, shows everyone around that you're no longer the best person, that's a different thing. That's a whole different kind of thing. Likely, you should have been gone years ago. Like, real talk. Like, that's just kind of what I'm seeing as I'm helping other organizations through this process. And so and that goes for anybody, because at the end of the day, most Black people don't want to just be handed a thing. They really want to be invited to something that they know that they can add to and contribute to, because they are qualified to be there.
Absolutely.
So
I love that you shared that all of this lands on leadership. And I could not agree with you more. And if I could lean into transparency here, it's something that I struggle with in terms of being a business owner, because, it's like, we're not a diversity, equity, and inclusion firm. We are a leadership development firm.
Mhm.
Here's why DEI is connected to that. But in that same spirit, so, say you have, what you often do, the expert in the area who is promoted to be a people leader, who has that blind spot. They're not a good leader. They're great at what they do, but they're not great at leading people. As a leader that sits, and you're an executive leader, so as a leader of leaders, how do you coach up? How do you develop? And how do you help leaders to lead better, to serve? Because when that really becomes the motive, then you're serving everybody regardless of difference. How do you do that
Exactly.
in your organization?
So let me say, I've had an awful lot of training on this from a lot of different directions in the last year. But I tell everybody, that's great. It's been wonderful. But I've lived in this body almost 50 years, doing what I do, the way I've done it, trying to advance my own career in an industry that is mostly, largely, predominantly, or dominantly white male, 60 plus in age. So all of that disclaimer said, I think, and I'll be honest, like this is I've rehearsed this call today already this week. So this is fun for me to kind of retell this idea, but it's not going to be a popular thought at all. More and more, I'm coming to grips with there are a couple of different agendas here for every organization. We are, one, first and foremost, should be just creating extraordinary leaders, right? That's without anything else, because I do feel like in that path, a lot of this takes care of itself. So, case in point, I've had people come to me want to know how to fix life post George Floyd, how to fix their companies, what can we do? Where do we start? And I'm like, if you didn't check on them because of COVID, your team, like if you got a whole team of people that you're leading and you didn't check on them during the flood or the whatever, the power outage, but you didn't check on them after the thing downtown almost blew up. Like, trust has to be the basis too. So you can do all these things and still not have the intended consequence or the intended on the other side of that, your intention is still misguided and misplaced because you ultimately have not established the right rapport to even pull off anyone believing that this is coming from a genuine place. So I think that deals with from a leadership side. Then in the middle here, when I'm learning, we're gonna lean into that D&I module, right? It's like whether it comes from HR, whether it comes from ERGs, whether it comes from now the coveted D&I role, which I think that's a whole nother conversation. But over here, you got people who want to mix what this agenda could really look like from, pipelines upward, internship programs, all these different things equity, all these things that fall right and squarely into your corporate structure. But then over here, here's the beautiful point over here. It's anti-racism. And at some point, you have to realize that these groups here may be working towards a goal, that there's a group of people over here that are a little defensive towards it or anti-supportive, because really that's your racist people over here. So maybe you might need to kind of reverse engineer it a little bit and think, let's let them be racist, but let them support these initiatives. Because a lot of times it's like, it's do you want some gum? It's the person who's got the bad breath never accepts the gum. You could be, they never do. They never see that you could be trying to tell them something. And it's the same thing when having these conversations. They are not easy.
That is such a great analogy. And it's
they're uncomfortable.
I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, please take this.
Really, the racist person is not going to be the first one in the room to jump in and go, by golly, you just described me. No, they aren't. Yep. But if you get there, take the gum. Take the gum. It's like we have to kind of reverse, because it's psychology too. No one wants to be the bad guy. No one really. And I've met some incredible people who said to me, Gina, I've never considered myself to be racist, but I sure know after talking to you, I have not done enough not to be. That's a different group of people. But you also have them while they are learning how to not be. They can still be supportive, and they can keep working towards being a better version of them while we are, because everyone's coming into this somewhere different, right? Like there's a spectrum, and I've kind of tossed that around, but everyone is not starting their journey in the same place. So you can't really expect them to all jump on board at the same place. So some of that reluctancy may not fully be because they're all out racist. I don't want y'all leaving here side-eyeing everybody on your team. Like, well, maybe that was a little aggressive.
And talk about this work from this perspective. It is you. It is you. You are the co-founder of the newly formed Nashville Music Equality Initiative, and so you in addition to being an executive leader in the music industry, you're also doing the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I wanted to make that connection for people if they aren't familiar in terms of how we got to this topic. But you raised such
a insert, and I'm also Gina at Entertainment One, also at Hasbro, which is the toy global toy leader, also for the Recording Academy. So there's a lot of work that's been done, but when it boils down to it, it's the same work. It's the same agenda. Like we all are working to make our place, the community where we live, and start there. Like we need a place to start. Start with your own sphere of influence that you can. If it's not working corporately, start community-wise. Start at home. Start in your family, because more times than not, it's where it started.
That's exactly where it started. And I love that you said you mentioned anti-racism, because a lot of people with this new awakening last year, they think all of this stuff is new. Yeah. And I find myself having to continually have the conversation of diversity training started in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act. So none of this that we're talking about is new. And even though we've been doing it for so long, here we are. So what are those differences from an education perspective, so people understand the difference between anti-racism and I'm not racist?
Right.
Because those are different.
They're very different, right? And I think that, it still goes back to even people who are saying that they're showing up being supportive, but otherwise, because you've known them long enough to know the truth them that they don't even believe it's them, or they haven't come to some level of awareness that that's who they are and what they represent. So it's kind of like, that patience thing is a teetering spot too, because some of us have more patience than others. Everyone doesn't have even the same amount of patience to help us move through this in all these different spaces. So we have to also take some accountability for self.
Yep.
And Google's free. You're not free, but Google's free, right? Google's free, YouTube's free, Amazon, Chrome, there's all kind of ways to just search. At this point, there's too many resources that are free. Every major college, if you just think of a name, I bet you they have a diversity test that you can take, something that you can.
A survey,
a survey,
a blog, a book, like literally the resources are definitely out there. One question as we wrap up here, from the perspective of the Black professionals that are on. So I know we have some allies that are joining us, and we have some
hey y'all, all of y'all, hey
that are here. What would you say to Black professionals, and let's say mid-career professionals, who are in that environment where their company is trying to make a shift, but maybe they are still feeling that tension? Like, how do you lift up and lead up in that kind of environment when you are a Black professional that wants to have a more inclusive experience?
I think that I would say, from my experience, and sometimes you have to figure it out from the inside and sometimes from the outside. And I say that because a lot of times, and I can only go by these examples of what I'm walking out every day. Like there are a lot of great things that are happening on the inside. But I'm also finding that it only takes 1 or 2, 3 calls to people who on the outside of your workplace, who know someone on the inside that can help. So this kind of boils down to back to vulnerability, like being vulnerable enough to reach up to that person who can help bring you up. Like you got to be willing to say, like, let's try to talk this out, so you understand that this is not a threatening position that I want to put you in. Like, I'm literally trying to understand where you stand. And guess what? I've had those conversations, and they all haven't been met with champagne and confetti. You know, some of those you just got to go, okay, well, that's not your person. Because guess what? When you find your person who's willing to not just talk good to you about what's possible, who's willing to take you and sponsor you and create with you and introduce you, the sky really is the limit. The sky really is the limit. Like, you know, there is a thing. I'm really trying for the optics of this work that we're doing, especially in Nashville, is that it's not enough to hear from Brittany. It's not enough to hear from me. We really do need as many white people. And y'all, let's get comfortable saying black and white. Let's just everybody practice it right now. Wherever you are all around the world. Just practice saying, let's normalize that, because that gets very uncomfortable for people. That alone is like, you know, brings a level of tension that just should not be there. So what we really do need is for some white person to say, you know what? I've done this so long this way. Let's sit down and get to know each other better. You may have some ideas that I haven't considered. Oh, guess what? I've been on this board. I can give you 25 quick action things you can do today. I've assessed what you've been a part of. If it's all white, it's time for you to find a black person to say, let me invite you into this space. Maybe this is the year you give up that board seat to someone else that you know deserves a shot, or bring them along for the meeting so people can become familiar with who they are as a person, as an executive, as a whatever. And it could also look like, you know what, let's take those coffee breaks. Let's do a one-on-one, because we haven't had, I gave you a bad rap because of blah, blah, blah. A lot of times, it's not excuses. It really becomes that people have not had an opportunity to show you fully all the, we are more than what most of us do. Everybody on this, everybody that's watching this. And we get stuck a lot of times in just being boxed into the thing that people know that we do. Corporate doesn't take enough time to develop everything else about who we are. It could be very well some other things in there that you can connect with someone else who goes, gosh, I was looking for someone like that before I just hired outside of the company. I could have, if I had known, you could have been the person to apply for that role. Like, you got to take your own vulnerable self and be okay with asking enough questions. So if the questions don't lead you to answers, they at least lead you to more questions. And if you keep questioning the questions, eventually you'll get an answer. If it's an answer that you don't like, they're not your people. You got to keep pivoting.
Find your people.
Until you find your people. When you find your people, you won't have to worry about them feeling like you're impeding on something they've got. You won't have to worry about them feeling like, oh, you're going to get the credit and not them. You won't have to worry about any of that. So you got to find your tribe. You really absolutely have to find, and that's everywhere, pretty much. Everywhere your feet trod, you got to know who your people are.
That is so good. Well, you are my people, and I appreciate.
Yes, we are people.
I appreciate you. Thank you for.
I appreciate you too.
Saying yes and sharing. The chat is just blowing up over here, and this has been awesome. Yes, an awesome way to wind down the day. So, any last words as we roll into our final session? That we will have before our closing session is DEI is everybody's job. So some last words, Gina, before we head into our final session.
Well, I think that's the truth, because guess what? We all have biases. We all have prejudices. So also get comfortable with that too, because they didn't mean that you're like, you know, the KKK cheerleader. They didn't mean that. That just means that your lifestyle, your upbringing, your journey along the way has shaped an idea that may be the reason why you think that someone else's idea, not even superior to yours, it's just, we got to make sure that we don't say that we're putting people in a box to be different is a problem. No, the differences that we all bring to this table is the ultimate reason for having diversity as the root of it. So I think we embrace that, embrace your experiences, embrace everything about who you are. And I promise you, if you do, you'll know the right people for you are absolutely on their way to you.
Yes. Awesome. Give it up in the chat. I don't know if if you're on your phone, you can do the hand emojis or exclamation points, but thank you for being our close out fireside chat today. And I just want to remind everybody, we've got one more session and then we got a closeout that you don't want to miss. We got some giveaways and I want to just remind you about how to enroll in the giveaways. So one, make sure that you are sharing, posting. I've been able to grab my phone and see a couple of posts and shares on either LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you are, but just use the hashtag APB 2021 so we can find it. And then we want you to share your thoughts on the topic. So on the platform, there's a space for you to share your takeaway. And you all have been sharing some great takeaways from the session today. So we appreciate you doing that, for being a part of this. And we will see you over in our final session. DEI is everybody's job. Let's get it. Thanks, Gina.
All right, Brittany. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.